Okay, Elizabethan Notes, take 2, part G, post Bloody Mary. We're going to continue through with the reign of Elizabeth and James, so here we roll. Elizabeth I, who was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, takes the throne in 1558 and rules until her death in 1603 upon Bloody Mary's death. Bloody Mary died after only being on the throne about 5 years. She died from a tumor in her stomach area. She thought she was pregnant, and after her tummy grew, which about the size of a basketball, she realized, I guess after having been quote-unquote pregnant for about 13 months, that this probably was not normal. And she eventually, of course, died from complications with cancer, but not before she killed 300 Protestants, and she took away as many as she possibly could. So Elizabeth is the last child of Henry VIII, and she is the daughter of Anne Boleyn. This is a kind of a questionable thing for the country at that point, because many of the citizens believed Anne Boleyn to not be a legitimate wife of Henry I. Of course, all of your Catholics, and we're coming off of Bloody Mary, who was staunchly Catholic, all of your Catholics still considered Catherine of Aragon the rightful queen, the only queen, and therefore the next in line for the kingship or the throne would be Mary Stuart, who was the Queen of Scotland at the time. And so because of that, there were lots of issues. They would yell at Elizabeth. They would they considered Anne Boleyn to be the king's whore, and so for them, Elizabeth was not a legitimate answer to queen, and it just sort of caused a little bit of unrest in that area. But Elizabeth ends up maintaining quite the legacy. I'm sure you've heard much of it. The Virgin Queen reigns the longest, remains unmarried, and uses this to her political advantage between France and Spain. And France and Spain at the time were considered your world powers or superpowers. They had large militaries, and therefore they were considered your stronger countries. Elizabeth, of course, would be able to use her eligibility almost as a bargaining chip, so it worked to her advantage quite well. During Elizabeth's reign, she ends the religious turmoil pretty much. While she is Anglican, or Protestant, and the majority of the country at this time was Catholic, she herself was quite tolerant. Now, many of her counselors were not as tolerant, and there was a lot of kind of shady goings on between the government and some of your more powerful Catholics that Elizabeth just sort of turned a blind eye to. But for the most part, it was a little more peaceful than previous years, especially those Bloody Mary years. The problem with Elizabeth being the queen, of course, like we said, is Mary Stuart, who was next in line, if you're considering Catherine of Aragon the only source or the only wife to Henry VIII. So Elizabeth had Mary imprisoned for 19 years. And by imprisoned, it's, air quotes, imprisoned. Mary was kept in her house. She was like under house arrest. During this time period, she was consistently corresponding with people in England who were trying to help her assassinate Elizabeth. Of course, Elizabeth's people were consistently intercepting all of these letters, and so they kind of had a record of Mary's issue. Mary, through Henry VIII, was Elizabeth's cousin, so this was a family situation, and Elizabeth did not want to really ruffle the feathers of family. While she was imprisoned, of course, she was plotting against them. And finally, Parliament just sort of put their foot down with Elizabeth and said, you have to get rid of her. You have to kill her. This whole house arrest thing is not working out because she's consistently plotting, and we're trying to intercept everything, but some things are going to get through. So they insisted that Elizabeth kill Mary Stuart. And so she was beheaded in 1587. Of course, the Catholic Church considered her a martyr because she was trying to maintain rule for the Catholic Church and for Catholic England. You can go to that really fun little eyewitness to history site, and there's an eyewitness to Mary Stuart's beheading. I want to think she was the one that had to go through an extra chop. The blade was not quite sharp enough. Was that it? I think it was her. I know she was the one who they made a comment that her lip twitched for a full 15 minutes after her head was separated from her shoulders. So, interesting little read there if you're curious. During Elizabeth's reign, England became a supreme world power by defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588. There's a very famous painting of Elizabeth, posing in this huge giant dress with all these jewels and bows on it and just kind of ornate over the top kind of thing, and she's got a globe in one hand and the scepter in the other, and then behind her is a picture on one side of the sunny Spanish Armada coming in, and then on the other side is a stormy Spanish Armada because England at that time did not have the manpower or the boat power, I guess, to defeat Spain's massive armada. Spain had pretty much depleted their economic resources by building this huge fleet of ships in their attempt to completely take over England, essentially. And so they sent all these huge, expensive ships out towards England in an attempt to take over. And Elizabeth meets him with fireboats. Small little boats that they set on fire, sent their direction, and suddenly a storm comes in and sends those fires just everywhere, and the Spanish Armada is completely destroyed. Of course, this is to Spain. They think that God, Catholic Spain, they think that God is on their side, and here, clearly Elizabeth knows a little something they don't, or has the weather on her side. Okay, upon Elizabeth's death in 1603, James I, who is the cousin of Elizabeth and formerly James VI of Scotland, takes the throne. James is the son of Mary Stuart, the aforementioned beheaded one, and he was at the time the King of Scotland, the 6th James. James began a deeply religious time of great political unrest. Everyone acts like they're Protestant or Anglican, but privately does what they want. James was very much against the Catholic Church, even though he himself was a Catholic and considered himself Scottish, not English. He detested the Puritans. This is the time period when your Puritans are beginning to sort of start their process into moving to the New World. This is where your Puritans are exiting England and trying to find somewhere where they have quote-unquote religious freedom, which basically just means they want to go somewhere else and set up their own religious place where nobody can be anything but Puritan. They essentially go to Amsterdam first, and they found that Amsterdam was a little bit too free for them, kind of the same way today, I guess. And so they left Amsterdam and eventually made their way into the Americas. But it was mostly James I is the king who really prompted that mass exodus from England. He was married to a Catholic woman, and in 1611 he had scholars translate and produce the King James Bible, which is a major political production. Prior to this, your churches used what is known as the Geneva Bible, and the Geneva Bible was called such because of they had all of these marginal notes. The Geneva Bible had marginal notes throughout the entire thing, and these notes were basically life application type things on scripture interpretation, extra translations from Greek and Hebrew, whatever, those kinds of things. But these marginal notes really kind of were what separated the Puritan church from your Catholic church or your Anglican church. They were very, very strict with their marginal notes and abiding by those sort of man-made guidelines. So King James had the Bible translated. He hired about 50 scholars, and they basically took the original Greek and Hebrew and put it in its purest form. The King James Bible is a beautiful, beautiful collection of scriptures. It's written in Shakespeare's English, the same kind of format, really. And it's not that difficult to understand if you're looking at it from that perspective. But it is, now that we've, moved into our more modern way of speaking, not really language, it's the same language, but we've moved to this modern way of speaking. People prefer other translations often these days. Of course, you all know he did not write the King James Bible. He simply paid people to translate it. It's not even certain that James necessarily believed the Bible. It's just he used it to his political advantage. He was quite a strange man. He did ascend the throne of England with the divine right of kings firmly embedded in his mind. He fully believed that God purposefully put him on that throne, and that therefore no one but God could take him off of that throne, and that every decision he made was approved by God. That's how he felt. And all of this, of course, from a man who enjoyed torturing people. While he was in Scotland in 1591, he personally supervised the torture of poor wretches caught up in this witchcraft trials of Scotland. They were not just, witchcraft trials were not just a thing from the Crucible. It was all over all over England during this time period as well. He actually wrote a book called Demonology, which would help you help folks, recognize signs of witches, and offered ways to help them either get over it or get rid of them. He would suggest new methods of torture to these examiners who were examining mostly women of witchcraft, and it was things like moles and birthmarks and those kinds of things. He wrote the book on witch hunting, which was Demonology, and it helped define methods of identifying and executing witches. He preferred young boys to women. This was recorded often by members of the court. So it wasn't like it's kind of, a rumor necessarily, but there were several different instances of records showing that at the very least, James was bisexual. He was an avid hunter and relished in the kill. It was rumored that he would roll around in the blood of the animal he killed before dressing it. And this was another one of those kinds of weird things about James, that he just was quite the sociopath. He enjoyed doing anything that would inflict pain upon another creature, and this was, of course, with the witchcraft trials as well. Okay, we're going to wrap up the Renaissance with that last slide, and we'll discuss the gunpowder plot a little bit later. Don't forget your note cards.